The Battle of Iwo Jima was, after all, not only the biggest marine operation in World War II, but it also encompassed everything the Marine Corps purported to represent: courage, sacrifice, honor, camaraderie, persistence, and discipline. Despite the engagement's renown, even World War II buffs remain unfamiliar with the Marine commander at Iwo Jima who fought and won the battle: General Harry Schmidt, head of the 5th Amphibious Corps. Smith had led the Fleet Marine Force in the Pacific, but he exercised almost no direct authority over tactical operations on the island. Instead, it was Schmidt who bore the leadership burden on Iwo Jima, but he has received little acknowledgement for his role and actions, even in detailed accounts of the operation. The anonymity of Marine Corps World War II commanders is not limited to Schmidt on Iwo Jima. Although such marine battles at Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Iwo Jima are well known, most military enthusiasts are unaware of the generals who led the Leathernecks through these horrific engagements. Army Generals George Marshall, Dwight Eisenhower, Douglas MacArthur, and George Patton are readily recognized among people with even a passing familiarity with World War II. Even the naval commanders, Ernest King, Chester Nimitz, and William Halsey, ring a bell with the historically literate. The names of Marine Corps generals such as Schmidt, men who led tens of thousands of Leathernecks through some of the Pacific War's most important and difficult battles, have been all but forgotten. There are various reasons for the anonymity of these Marine Corps combat commanders. One is size. During World War II, the Marine Corps was much smaller than the Army and the Navy. By the end of the conflict, the Army had nearly 8.3 million personnel and the Navy 3.3 million. Marine Corps strength, on the other hand, peaked at about 477,000. Whereas the Army sent overseas 90 15,000-man divisions organized into 20 corps, the Marines' contribution consisted of only 6 divisions and 2 corps deployed to the Pacific. Thus, it was primarily the Army that waged and won the war against Germany and Italy for the United States. Even in the Pacific, the Army deployed far more divisions, 21, and conducted more amphibious assaults than the Marine Corps. This meant that the Marines engaged in fewer operations than the Army and Navy, giving Marine generals limited opportunities to distinguish themselves. Moreover, Marine generals lacked a prominent voice in strategic planning for the Pacific War. The Marine Corps, as part of the Navy, was subject to that service's general authority and had no representation in the Inter-Service Joint Chiefs of Staff, which determined grand strategy for U.S. forces. Marine generals did not command any of the geographic theaters of war. In short, Army and Navy officers determined strategic objectives and expected their Marine counterparts to carry out their decisions. As a result, Marine generals had little opportunity to dazzle contemporaries and historians with the strategic acumen that Army and Navy officers such as Nimitz, MacArthur, and Eisenhower displayed, or, as some critics argued, failed to demonstrate. The Marine Corps' emphasis on amphibious warfare also hindered its combat generals from achieving renown. Marine amphibious assaults against Pacific islands were relatively simple in conception and required little tactical finesse to conduct. In other words, the geography and terrain the Marines confronted usually called for direct assaults that provided Marine generals with few opportunities to display the kind of brilliant tactics that won Patton and other Army generals fame. To be sure, these amphibious operations were extraordinarily difficult to organize, but the logistical, training, and planning skills that Marine officers needed to make them successful were not sufficiently glamorous to attract kudos from those interested in tactics and strategy. In some respects, Marine generals were simply victims of American success. As the conflict progressed, the United States' overwhelmingly material and numerical superiority over targeted Japanese island garrisons virtually guaranteed Marine victory before the first Leathernecks hit the beach. The outcome was rarely in doubt. It was instead just a question of casualties and time. How many